Good morning, curious coders. This is Dan with Code Club. Today I'm going to be talking about prototyping with the Espruino, and this pretty much applies to prototyping on any one of these microprocessors, the Arduino, or any of the whole family of things. Now, if you come to it like I do from the software side, you're used to having a keyboard and a monitor and some sort of documentation, and it's mostly making it up as you go along. There's not a lot of physical invention. The prototyping side of things, the hardware side of things, well, you can't just imagine a connection. You actually have to build a connection. So in this case, we would have to solder to these individual little pinholes here for every one of the connections we want to make. What that looks like, this is an LCD display. It's obviously very small. Again, I soldered this up last night. This stuff right here, this is called pin strip, and that's how we're going to connect a lot of our pins here to other things for prototyping. What that looks like is you end up buying this strip of wire, and they have little connections on the ends that you can see here. In this case, we would connect them like so, and we're just going to peel off the number that we need, just pull it apart, and we just need to make a connection here. Now, that being said, pin strip or header pin strip comes in a package like this. I think the whole package was like $4, $5, and I don't think I'm ever going to run out. It's a strip like this. We only need, what, 8 pins? So I'm going to break off just the amount that I need to wire in. Now, the thing that I'm using to reference, again, this is Espruino.com. They have a tutorial section that tells you what you'll need, all that kind of stuff. It kind of glosses over some of the technical details, like how to solder. Again, I come to this from a software side of things, but when I was younger, I was also an enthusiast in model railroading, and my dad was a ham radio operator. So what you need to do this is a soldering iron, solder, and this is solder for electronics. You can see how old this is, Radio Shack. If you go to Lowe's or your normal home goods sort of or a home improvement warehouse, they kind of make it idiot proof. I think Lowe's has 3 different soldering irons. This is the biggest of them, the most high powered of them. Don't be afraid of going hotter than you specifically need. One of the things that you have to be careful of when you're soldering, as you're putting these things together, is just knowledge and practice. So if you want to buy just a regular not circuit board, but just a circuit board that just has pins and practice for a little bit, that's totally okay. What you want to do is heat the component and melt the solder to it, not melt the solder onto the board. What you want is a good clean connection electronically between the metal and the solder, and then the metal of the board. So we're going to get started with soldering, and I want to bring up this instruction set again. You can see that they've actually given the pins names, and when you're looking at your board, it may not be super obvious first thing, but if you actually look at the board, I've got it upside down here, let it focus in. A2, A3, A4, A5. They've actually referenced those here in the A2, A3, A4, A5. So when you look on the back of this board, you'll actually see names for everything. So this tells you, this little key here tells you what everything is going to get hooked up to. So let's get started. again, my soldering iron is here. It's ready. I turned it on just a minute ago, make sure it's nice and warm. I took some pin strip. I took 8 of these, and again, it just snaps right off. And we can align those. If you look at our labels here, A2, A3, A4, we're going to just set that in place there, and you can see that that's a nice easy fix, nice easy affixing of those things. Again, this is a prototyping board. We're not going to try to put this in a box, so I'm not super concerned about how accessible these buttons will be when the wires are eventually going to stick out there. It's not going to lay down flat. On the other side of the board, you can see the pins. See the pins kind of sticking out there. And let the camera focus. So what we're going to do is we're going to lay this down. On this, in this case, I've got a sheet of paper. My tabletop is for mica, which has got a plastic coating on it. You learn from experience not to melt your furniture. So the first thing we're going to do is my soldering iron has a light on it, so I'm going to have to play with this just a little bit, make sure that the light is right. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to roll out just a little bit of solder here, so I've got some room. And again, you make contact with the metal piece first and let the solder flow into the joint. So now that we have this on here, you'll notice that it's crooked. So we just wanted to get that first solder joint set up so that we know the rest of it is going to be relatively stable. And now that that one is in place, I think you can see it. We're going to go through fairly short order, fairly rapidly, and do the rest of them. Alright, so that was not the prettiest job, but you can see from the light there that they are all connected at this point. So for safety's sake, we're going to turn off and unplug our soldering iron. I forgot to mention that I also have a wet sponge handy. And that's nice for taking excess solder off the tip of the soldering iron. We're going to set that aside in a safe place, and we're going to examine our work. Again, it's not super pretty, but you can see that the connections are solid on all of the joints. See that it's square, fairly square up and down. And what that give us then, and again we want to consult our documentation, so we're going to go ground to A2. And you see at the back of our board here, ground is this orange pin. We would just line it up like that. I'm going to wait for the board to cool just a little bit more before I start plugging things in, but we would go ground to A2 and on down the strip so that we're plugged in. So now I've gone through and gotten this running, so let's talk about what I did real quick. I'm going to unplug here. Got a little bit more maneuverability. We had our header pin strip set up on this board and header pin strip set up on the Espruino as well. One thing, because we are not directly soldering them together, we're connecting it through cables. If you read the instructions, which I always recommend reading the instructions, one of the things they call out is this DC and DIN, digital in. These pins are actually swapped. So in the instructions they show how to basically twist those pairs because they're hardwiring these two boards together. We're not hardwiring them. In fact, we don't need to do any of that twisting. We can do that with the cable. So if you see here, there's the DC and D in. I've actually twisted the pair here. So that gets us the proper connection. Now finally, on the page they've got the code that actually runs on the board. And so I've pasted that in here. So I'm going to connect to the board again. And if my dog chimes in, as she is wont to do, she's currently very curious about what's going on up here. All right, come on. We are now plugged in. And turn the camera back on. So you can see I'm plugged in back there, my lovely pink micro USB. So let's walk through this code real quick. What this does, the A2 and A4 that sets up a ground and a current for the board, and the SP1 is basically a serial port. We're going to set up how we're communicating to things. This on init function is called here with the double, the parentheses. This sets a 200 millisecond wait before it executes the code inside here. And this set of instructions basically it basically communicates with the PCD8544 display, and that's what this display is. And it's a library that's included in Espruino. So we're going to connect to it on this SPI1, and we're going to give it some pins, some instructions on how to communicate with the world. In this case, the first instruction is going to be clear. The next instruction is going to be drawing a string. The string happens to be hello. It's a string of characters. And finally, draw a line. So we're going to send this to the board. First, we're going to connect to the board. And then we're going to send it. And you'll see that it's, in fact, flipped. I'll flip this back over. You can see this now. So now we have a display for our board that we can play with. So I think that's pretty cool. Again, this did not happen on the first try. So if you get frustrated, feel free to reach out in the comment section. Feel free to try again. Make sure you double check your work and reread the instructions. I hope you have a good day and go play with an Espruino.